attacking those opposed to same-sex marriage as basing their entire argument on the Bible and calling them Bible thumpers. He uses the term compelling. You see what he's written here. I agree with you 100%. The compelling argument is on the side of the homosexuals. That word compelling is interesting because it is the one the Supreme Court uses a couple of times in the Roe v. Wade decision justifying the murder of the undelivered infant. So I guess Bill O'Reilly comes from that same ilk. Well, Bill O'Reilly's a fraud, and Fox News is a fraud, and I've said this on this station many, many times, and here's the evidence of it. Let's take a little bit of a look at this issue about same-sex marriage. Listening to Ted Olson's arguments, they are incredibly weak. He's the attorney that is trying to get the duly passed legislation of California, which banned same-sex marriage, overturned, not legislatively as it ought to be, but through the courts. And of course, the courts have no constitutional authority to do so. But in this fascist dictatorship in which we live today, the Constitution is essentially irrelevant. Affirmative action, Justice Sotomayor questioning is incoherent, to say the least. And I have to say that both sides seem to be pretty much ignorant, but try to conceal that through overwhelming arrogance. Let's take a look at the way things really are. I know that you're not going to hear this anywhere, and we get confused with all the garbage and tripe. Marriage is not a right. Bottom line, marriage is not a right. Marriage is a contract, and it is a contract that in a society is based upon certain cultural, social traditions, and which creates a legal institution which defines marriage, what marriage is, and the relationship and the legal aspects associated with marriage. It is not a natural right, obviously. It can't be a natural right because there's material cost to it. There are obligations, responsibilities, divisions of proceeds, all kinds of things which are materially based, which precluded being a natural right. There is an agreement, a contractual agreement between parties. There are responsibilities between those parties. There's divisions of labor. There's divisions of proceeds. That is not a right. It is anything that takes the energy or the fruits of someone else's labor through a contract. It's not a right. There has to be a mutual agreement. Or a right does not require anyone else's agreement. The right of free speech does not require the agreement by someone else to allow me to speak. My right of self-defense, of bearing arms, does not require the agreement of anyone else or the allowance of someone else to the permission of someone else for me to do it. But marriage is mutual consent between parties. And every society has the right to decide how it's going to define marriage. The structure of marriage is arbitrarily defined, as most human social activities are arbitrarily defined based upon traditions or upon beliefs, religious or otherwise. Monogamy is not intrinsic to marriage. Polygamy has existed throughout much of the world, exists throughout parts of the world today. Marriage, often in many countries, is not the joining of individuals equally, but in which one party is subservient to another. So marriage can take on many forms and aspects. In our society, the tradition is that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that did not come about just by picking a method out of a hat. The founders of the nation, their belief system, had come to a conclusion already for some time that the most effective unit of a society was to have a man and woman raising, one man, one woman, bound together in a contractual arrangement, raising children. That was what was best for society. And they agreed that was the basis of the nuclear family in the United States, and that polygamy and other types of structures would not be permitted. And that came through a mutual agreement based upon the belief of what they thought was the best way of doing things. Not that it was just something pulled out of a hat. Once that basis is defined, then in a free society, which is ours, theoretically, you cannot have restrictions based upon other criteria. For example, if your society says that a marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's what it says in our society, between a man and a woman, then if they are of different races, that should have no bearing on their ability to get married. If they're of different religions, that should have no bearing on their ability to be married. Or any other criteria beyond the fact that they are one of each gender and one of each, becoming married, bonding under contract. Therefore, since marriage cannot be prevented based upon reasons of race, ethnicity, or religion. Now, private institutions which have marriages, such as, let's say, a church, to be a member of the church may require that you marry within the same religion. They cannot prevent you from marrying, but as a private institution, they can say you cannot belong to this organization unless you follow this organization's rules. And that's perfectly reasonable. And so if the Catholic Church, for example, says you must marry a Catholic, or a Protestant church or a Baptist church says that it must be between two Baptists or the same religion, whether it's Muslim or Jewish or whatever, and I do believe in some areas there are definitely, I know in the Orthodox religion, Jewish religion, you can't be Orthodox if you marry outside the faith. You cannot belong to the Orthodox group. Now that's perfectly acceptable, because if you want to belong to an organization, you need to follow the rules of the organization. However, that cannot prevent the civil ceremony from occurring, cannot prevent secularly based marriage, that the state sets up a structure which facilitates and allows marriage between a man and a woman. And so the issue of civil rights does not exist in this issue of same-sex marriage, because homosexuality does not fit into the societal definition of marriage. Civil rights, therefore, do not apply. The requirement is that the couple be of opposite sexes, and no barrier can be raised based upon race or any other criteria, because all must be allowed equal treatment under the law. Equal treatment. But being homosexual marriage is not equal treatment. They do not fit the definition of marriage in our society. Maybe in another society, but not in our society. As homosexuality, by definition, does not meet the criteria society has placed on the act of marriage, they have no standing on the issue whatsoever. If the people of a free society agree through consensus that marriage between homosexuals shall be legally recognized, then it becomes permissible and legal. Ted Olson's argument that polygamy and same-sex marriage are different and distinct is completely false, because the rules which would allow homosexual marriage and the rules under which such marriage would exist would, of course, encompass any other kind of marriage in which was felt to be acceptable. So if the state said that polygamous marriages were acceptable, then, of course, that would be acceptable, and they would have the same contractual arrangement rules as far as divisions of responsibilities, labor, and proceeds as any other marriage. You cannot change the contract based upon the people that are in it. The contract has to hold the same for all. In other words, a polygamous marriage would have to be under the same contractual arrangement as heterosexual or homosexual if society said that such marriages could be permitted. The marriage contract is particular, and whoever is allowed into the marriage contract has to be abidement by the rules of the contract. And so, therefore, if the state says that marriages are acceptable, then they would be under the same stipulations as any other type of marriage. So Ted Olson's arguments are completely wrong. No surprise there. Of course, the federal courts have no constitutional authority in this regard. It's not an issue of rights. There's no rights no rights to talk about marriage being a right. There is nothing in the Constitution which allows the federal government to be involved in the internal affairs of a state. Nothing whatsoever. It's not an issue of cultural issues are not part of the Constitution. The states alone have authority over such issues of marriage. And so a state, if the people of the state wanted it so and said that polygamy was legal, then a state could have polygamous marriages as legal. Now, the Union of States, the United States, might have a rule that says no state that permits polygamous marriage can belong to our association. And that is the prerogative of the organization to say that. You have to follow, if you belong to an organization, you need to follow the rules of the organization. If the organization says you cannot belong to this organization if you permit polygamous marriages in your state, then that state has the option of either leaving the Union of States or reversing itself on its particular law. And so there's a logic to all of this if one wishes to apply it. But there is no logic in the government, the media, or the courts these days. The acceptance of homosexual marriage is an opinion, emotionally derived through a re-education process without any supportive evidence whatsoever. It's not a decision reached by a progressive or liberated mind, but on the contrary, but through a mind completely indoctrinated, because there is no rationality behind it. It is simply an opinion arbitrarily achieved and promoted through propaganda and accepted through indoctrination. This is the same process that the Nazis used in Germany to indoctrinate the people to believe that one race was superior to another. It's exactly the same process. Not to say that the propaganda in one way is good or evil intrinsically. We cannot say that. However, what we can say is that the process by which the acceptance of homosexual marriage in the United States, if such a general acceptance truly exists, because the media lies and there's really no way of knowing what the truth is based upon the media or the politicians, that the process by which the American people have come, those who have come to agree, who have no particular self-interest, in other words, those who are themselves not homosexuals, those who agree that there ought to be the same privileges afforded to homosexual marriage as to heterosexual marriage, they have come to that conclusion through the process of indoctrination by the incorporation of propaganda. And that's all there is to it. Not to say, and that's it. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. That's the whole ball of wax. The only reason that it's found acceptable by those who accept it who are not directly involved is because they've been led to believe that to be the case. And it's exactly the same process by which the Nazis were taught their population, indoctrinated their population to believe that one race was superior to another, or that ethically it was wrong for intermarriage between, let's say, a German and a Aryan German and a Jew, for example. So propaganda, that's the way that it functions. It is essentially a brainwashing process. So that is how this has been achieved, through brainwashing. Now, if we look at some of the evidence, let's take a look at some that exists already. We know that the children of a single-parent household are more likely to live a life of poverty and crime than those children coming out of households with two parents. It is led to, we are wondering, why should that be so? And of course, it is most people believe is because of a lack of proper role models. Well, if a lack of proper role models, and that includes both the man and the woman, most of those instances, the woman living on welfare, uneducated, living on welfare, ward of the state, and no man around is the usual single-sex head of a household family. If a lack of role models is what produces that type of result of poverty, ignorance, and crime, and the lack of role models has been taken to the nth degree through the raising of children in a homosexual environment. There's really no way that the long-term results of being raised in a homosexual environment can be discerned at the present time. It is not extensive enough, nor has it been around long enough. However, we do know that the promotion of single-parent families by the government through its welfare system has resulted in a catastrophic cultural degeneration of the black population and significant proportions of other populations, including Spanish-speaking and Anglo, in which there's a complete perversion of the family structure and a reliance upon the state for everything that the family or the individual gets. Basically, serfs and drones. Therefore, the likelihood of this state-created family will result in individuals that they have problems. Let's just say there will be problems if this proceeds on its present course. Now, we need to define, what is perversion? Well, perversion is there's a definition for perversion, and it is essentially having an object do something other than its intended function. So clearly, there are perversions here simply by definition. And one would think that perversions of biology must have some enormous negative psychological implication. So this issue is complete nonsense. It is trying to make something fly which cannot. The airplane can fly because only if the structure of it adheres to scientific principles. Trying to make something work which doesn't adhere to scientific principles is doomed to failure. For a society to move forward, or for human life to move forward, requires the act of procreation. deviance from that can only have deleterious ultimate effects. And so this is just the kind of nonsense that is in a society that has too much free time. And speaking of that, I want to move on to another subject because I kind of had it with that one. It's just emblematic of what kind of cesspool our society now resides in. We have this issue with North Korea, which is a fascist state, much worse than our fascist state. And they do have but you can see when you get the absolute fascism that they have, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. You have Barack Obama, who's a megalomaniac. But because of certain constraints, he is not inhibited. Therefore, there has to be some rationale to his megalomania. Those constraints do not exist in North Korea. And so you have a real nutcase. This is someone who does believe that he is God. And there's no way of knowing what is in his mind, since his mind is the mind of a child with nuclear weapons, an undisciplined child. So if there's no constraints put on human psychology, you become more and more empowered, and you believe yourself to be more and more omniscient and omnipotent. Take your typical movie star. They don't think the rules apply to them, and they can get away with whatever they want because they're allowed to, and therefore there's no limit as to what they can do, and they keep stretching those limits because they don't have any negative consequences for their behavior. There you have our political class, and why the political class is so enamored with so much like the people in the entertainment industry, because they have no limits. Well, in North Korea, their leader has no limits, and he's a nut. Unfortunately, he's dangerous because it's a nut with a gun. So what are we to do? Well, the people in South Korea much say, well, this is just usual bluster, because technically the state of war has never ended. They have had a ceasefire for 60 years, but there's never been an ending of the war technically. So they are in a state of war to this day. Now, if we go back to 1939, 1940, the majority of the French didn't think Hitler meant it. Pretty much right up to the date that they were invaded. And we saw the result of that type of psychology. And so the question arises is, what is the United States to do in this situation? Well, we have kind of committed ourselves to South Korea. And I don't know what the minds of the South Koreans are. Whether, obviously it seems to me it should be left up to them. But on another note, what impact would an invasion of South Korea by the North Koreans have as far as the United States, outside of the immediate military presence of the United States in South Korea? Obviously, an attack by North Korea on South Korea, a bombardment of North Korea and South Korea would imperil American lives that are there for the defense of South Korea. So there's that as far as direct self-defense. But is the United States obligated to help defend and preserve free societies? And we lead by example, that's true. But if you're directly attacked, if a free society is directly attacked, what should be the response of other free societies? Well, the response, the conscientious response, the honorable response is to defend other free societies. That is something that was not done in World War II, and why 60 million people ended up dying. And then Eastern Europe ended up in the hands of communist thugs where millions of more were killed. And that, of course, goes for China as well. So it's easy to talk in abstract, but when it comes down to reality and there's real possible ramifications of a decision, then it becomes a little bit harder. And nobody wants to send someone else's children into harm's way. However, sometimes by not doing that at a small level results in a lot more people ending up in harm's way, which is exactly what happened in World War II and in China and in Eastern Europe. By not putting up a common front in the early stages, the disease process grew to be much bigger and the ramifications got to be a lot worse than if the situation had been dealt with at its earlier stages. So my opinion is on this issue with North Korea is this person is a megalomaniac. He's insane. And there's no way of knowing if he means what he says. There's no way of knowing. Now, maybe today he doesn't, but maybe tomorrow he will. So there's really no way of knowing. But what is the example beyond that? What is the example that is being given? Well, the example right now is showing that you can bluster and enslave and kill and get away with it if the forces aligned against you are weak and feckless, as of course the forces aligned against him are weak and feckless. Barack Obama being a perfect example of weakness and fecklessness. So we're going to go to a break here. I'm going to continue with this discussion on what to do about North Korea after this short break. 7 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, streaming live on KURV.com. Seven on KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, holding our microphone, streaming live on KURV.com. So, anyway, it seems to me that the logical response of the United States would be a coordinated assault on all nuclear facilities in North Korea by some kind of saturation bombing to inactivate it, and then an invasion of the country and elimination of that government. Anyway, that's what I would do if I were president, which I guess I'm not going to be president. But the thing is that this essentially, how would you say it? Really, he's both consequence and inconsequential. North Korea, for what it does for the world, is of no consequence as far as production. But of course, it has tremendous consequence as to what might occur if there would be a breakout of the war there. There would, there you have China and you have the United States and you have all these conflicting interests with Japan and other parts of Asia and who knows what else. The longer it drags on, the more each side brings in its allies, and the much more likely it is that the conflagration will grow a lot bigger. A rapid strike on North Korean nuclear facilities and an invasion of the country and elimination of the government can be done. It would be but the benefits would be, there would be many benefits. One is that you would free the enslaved people of North Korea, which in and of itself is a worthy goal. Secondly, you would eliminate a potential, a mass murderer, comes from a long line of mass murderers, that can throw the entire world into another war with tremendous losses. And the other thing would be a great lesson to all other dictators in the world that they cannot act with impunity. So I think the upside is definitely in favor of doing that. The likelihood of the United States doing that, I don't know. I don't know what the likelihood is, but I think that's the way it ought to be approached. It's just a hard decision to take, but it really is in self-defense. After all, it is North Korea that's declaring war on the United States, on South Korea, and I guess the rest of the world. They're the ones declaring war. They're the ones who are the belligerents. And to wait, just sit on our hands waiting for them to do something, I think can only make matters a lot worse. So I think a saturation bombing of nuclear facilities, invasion of the country, massive invasion of the country, without no warning, no building up of troops, just do it. I do believe that after the initial stages, most of the resistance would collapse. It's an enslaved country, not a free country. I don't think that they have much of a chance against the advanced technological expertise of the American military. So I think it would do a lot of good for the world. And but that's just what I think. All right, we have Scott calling 710 KRV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Thanks for calling, Scott. What's your comment?
Yeah, Dr. Gilman, you're right about North Korea maybe starting a conflict and a worldwide conflict. We got a couple of things here, couple problems, and there's also a couple of things that North Korea is also is doing that's not making matters any better. One is they're definitely working with Iran and supplying them with some sort of guidance missile system. I'm pretty sure Iran's pretty close to having a nuclear weapon here pretty soon, if they don't already have it. Another thing is got to realize that North Korea, their nuclear arsenal came from both Russia and China, and these guys have supplied Pakistan with a bunch of weapons too. So they're nobody's friend out there, and we're going to have to, if we invade them and take them out along with South Korea and just invade them and take North Korea, which we need to do, because you're right, that we got a kid running their government over there, and everything is to him. He don't care if he ends the world. That's way it's a big game to him. And if we don't eliminate them, we're going to have bigger problems down the line. But we'll have to have China back us up. China should back us up with the amount of business we give them. I don't think North Korea is of any interest to China right now. And if it's a threat to the United States and the rest of the world and to the currency, I think you're going to see China turn around, back up the United States, and just take these guys completely out and eliminate them.
Well, I think China. Well, I don't think China will do anything. I think they may scream and holler a little bit because they may consider it their sphere of influence. But I think you're right. China is going to look at the situation and say, do we want to go to war with the United States or allow this idiot North Korea to go under? And I think it's pretty obvious what China would do. They're not really interested in going into combat against the United States, at least at the present time. They probably find this kid in North Korea, this bully in North Korea, to be more of a headache than of any kind of benefit to them. And so, and the other thing is that I don't think the North Koreans will put up much of a fight when they see that it's their sister or their own brothers that are coming across the border. That if they understand that it's not the United States that's going to be taking over North Korea, but South Korea, which is going to be taking over North Korea and creating a unified Korean nation, I think most of the resistance will dissolve, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of the North Koreans actually join up with the other side. I just don't see the North Koreans being able to put up much of a fight here. Of course, the risk is them causing a much greater conflagration. And remember, World War I started with a pistol shot all the way out there in Serbia, Montenegro, and all that over a local problem, which escalated into millions of dead people. It could. So he could cause problems. And you're exactly right. I think he looks at the world as kind of like a gigantic video game. Look, the guy was brought up in an asylum. His father wasn't crazy. His grandfather was crazy. These are crazy people. There's no way of knowing the way they look at the world. This guy may actually think he can do it. He may actually think that he can actually win. For him, it may be just some great honorable thing, and I really don't think he cares if he lives or dies, frankly. So,
Doctor, if he's already, he keeps threatening and keeps threatening. He's like a big bully on the block, and he keeps threatening. I know I heard that we sent a couple of stealth bombers in there and dropped a couple of dummies on their big cities to show them how quick we can get in and out of there if we have to do something.
Well, actually, it really
but
wasn't.
That guy laughs at it.
Well, see, that really was. I mean, it shows you how stupid Americans are. It wasn't even on their big cities. It was on some uninhabited islands owned by North Korea. I mean, they would have to send a camera crew out there to see what was going on. And I think all that demonstrates to that nutcase in North Korea is just how ineffectual the United States really is. We are a paper tiger. And you brought up Iran. I understand, but you see, North Korea has been an asylum now for at least 2 or 3 generations. So it's basically an entire country that's an insane asylum. Iran is a little bit different. There's still a bunch of rational people there, even in government. It is highly unlikely that Iran would behave the same way or do the same thing that right now as North Korea. However, as it is on the West Bank and in Gaza Strip, once you go a couple of generations into the insanity, then that's the norm. You see, that's a new norm to the way of thinking, and the new norm of society that's lived under propaganda and indoctrination for beyond a couple of generations is the new norm is they're a bunch of nuts. And just like the people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are a bunch of nuts, the people in the North Korean government is a bunch of crazy people. So how you gonna deal with crazy people? We didn't deal with them very well in Russia and Germany, and look what came of that. 100 years and hundreds of millions of people killed, and it's not over yet because
like you were talking about North Koreans. If it did happen where South Korea just took over the government of North Korea, wouldn't it be that the people have been slaves for so long that if they finally got a taste of freedom, wouldn't they not be insane? I mean, doesn't their government pretty much put them insane with all the propaganda and everything that they're fed, and they're starving, and they see all this murder?
Right, but it's a docile insanity. In other words, they're not going to rise up in rebellion against the democratic forces to remain a communist country. They are
Iran and Pakistan, you're dealing with religious fanatic insanity, which those guys said they'll blow up everybody and say we're on our way to heaven. Who cares?
I think in Pakistan you're correct because they've already been under a couple of generations of nuts. Iran, not so much. The Iranian people are really more intelligent than the Pakistani people, but you are correct that there's all these issues. You see, that's another problem. If North Korea is allowed to continue this way, it just emboldens the Ahmadinejad and the people in Pakistan and the Muslim Brotherhood. If they see, it's examples. It's examples to everybody. If they see what the North Korean guy can get away with, all it does is embolden all these others dictators as well. The same way as in Europe and in other places like Latin America. One learns by example, and if you see Castro getting away with something, well, the next thing you know, you've got Hugo Chavez. The next thing you know, you've got that nut in Ecuador, whoever that is. And that's what you start getting. You start getting this domino effect of dictators if they know they can get away with it. So it really does endanger much of the United States because even if North Korea wipes out South Korea, we think, oh, well, we can live without South Korea. That's kind of a dishonest position. But the United States has done it before. Just look at South Vietnam. But what that's going to do is make the governments of Iran and Pakistan even more bold in the way they behave. So these are things that the political mind of the United States. I mean, if you look, if the average political mind of the United States is given, let's say Joe Biden is the average intellect of the American politician, I think you can see that there isn't much there, not much upstairs, and so the odds of excuse me, the odds of the United States doing the the appropriate thing with the leadership that we have is highly unlikely.
So this just escalates to where it becomes even a bigger threat to Israel down the line too?
Well, Israel needs to fend on its own. It's its own country. It needs to take care of itself. What it does, it ought to be left to itself. But now that you bring that up, I do find it interesting that the Barack Obama has released funds to the barbarians in Al Fatah, the Palestinian organization there. Barack Obama, on his own, autocratically, as most dictators do, decided to give money to Palestinians because of what exactly? And so, the United States the United States would be better off. We'd be all better off if the United States did nothing, because mostly the United States does the wrong thing, because we have a bunch of Joe Bidens running the country, empty-headed, airheads. But
well, we're just instigating the matter into further chaos is all we're doing, our government right now, in the Middle East and Syria, you name it.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. We are actually worsening the problem. So even in North Korea, we're worsening the problem. So what we need to do is we need to eliminate their nuclear capacity. I don't think that will be very difficult to do. I think that could have been relatively easily, and invade and overthrow the North Korean government. That's what I would do. And I think that the longer this thing goes on, the worse it's going to be for the rest of the world. I think nobody's going to take this nutcase out. No one assassinated Hitler, so and nobody assassinated Stalin. So I don't think that's going to. We're knocking off a bunch of shepherds out in the desert, and we think that's tough. We're not doing it. They're not doing anything. But anyway, thanks for your call. Appreciate it. Now let's go. We have Raul calling from McAllen, 7 KRV. Thanks for calling. What's your comment, please?
Good morning, Dr. Gelman.
Morning.
In the meantime, all this killing is going on in the North Korean prisons.
Yeah.
Prison labor, and the starving and the killing of its own citizens in the field and starving to death. So what can be done about that? I do know that during the Korean War, we were fighting the Russian pilots and the Chinese infantrymen, that they just let them come over to North Korea.
Yeah.
But it's not like that anymore. And the appeasement goes on, and what just tears me apart, fills me with anger, is the citizens, God's children, are still being killed by this regime, whether in the prisons or toiling the fields, the land. What can be done about that, Dr. Gelman? I'll listen on the radio.
Okay, thanks for your call. Well, the only thing that can be done is by elimination of that government. Nothing else will work. The people who are enslaved in Cuba and in other places, without the elimination of the government, that's just never going to change. One can hope that with the replacement of one leader with another, things may improve, as they have in some instances, I guess, for some. But the problem is, let's say if you look at China, for example, and to a degree their situation has improved, though I imagine that most of the people live in misery. Their system is structured so that tomorrow another Mao can take over. And so one never knows in an environment like that what's going to be the future. So the direct answer to your question is, if you want to save the people of North Korea, well, the only thing you can do is it looks to me, because every one of their governments seems to be more insane than the previous one and more brutal and barbaric, is that you have to eliminate that government. So, and I don't know how to eliminate that government other than through force. But that's how the United States was created. The Revolutionary War was not a debate. They didn't sit around and debate each other and then a judge decide who won the debate. That was won through violence. I don't think anything's going to change in North Korea without violence occurring. So I think that it's a justifiable act of self-defense that the United States wipe out the North Korean government. So I think that's the only way to. I mean, how long is this going? This is just one day. One day something really nasty is going to happen over there, and we don't want to be on the wrong end of that. But history shows that that's what happens. These governments just allow things to get so big and so problematic that by the time something is done, it's really done almost accidentally, and millions of innocents get killed. It's interesting. Rarely do the leaders of these barbaric states, whether it's Hitler, Stalin, Mao, or Franklin Roosevelt, rarely is justice applied to them. Hitler killed himself. He never had justice applied. Mao never had justice. The world never. All the victims of Mao, of Roosevelt, of Hitler, of Stalin, they never really got their justice, and that just seems to be the way things always are. The really big criminals always seem to get away with it, and that's because they're allowed to do so. The victims of Kim Jong-il and all his other heirs and all of that, they have not received any justice, and they went to their graves without receiving any justice. And I certainly don't think the United States, as a country, imparts justice. I don't know if it ever did, but it certainly doesn't anymore. So. Anyway, so I reiterate it so people will be mistaken that, we didn't really mean that. I think we ought to, looking at the whole situation and thinking what's best for the United States and the free people of the world, including the people of the people of North Korea and South Korea, would be a rapid saturation bombing of all the nuclear facilities of North Korea, and an overthrow of that government done through force, or at least a threat of force. But I think it's going to have to be done through force, because I don't think those guys will bow to any kind of diplomatic pressure. But when you have the majority of the world's countries saying that Israel is the biggest threat to peace, and you have this nutcase in North Korea, I think that shows you the mindset of your average politician. I want to talk a little bit about the injustice in the United States and in the concentration camps that existed in the United States in the 40s. Concealed from most of American history is the dastardly deal done by Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and many other Democrats in the government of the United States that incarcerated 120,000 or so Japanese who had done nothing wrong for no other reason because of their appearance. If one wonders what government can do and what even the United States government can do, it needs to go no further than to see what the United States government did in its unjust incarceration of 120,000 Japanese men, women, children, even the elderly. The men were taken away without notice. There were knocks on the door at night, and the American military and other secret agents of the United States government took away Japanese individuals in the night. Shades of the Gestapo. The members of the American government were vociferous in their racist attitudes. No one in the American government did anything about the executive orders written by Franklin Roosevelt authorizing the Secretary of War or any military commander to establish military areas in the United States. The executive order establishing the War Relocation Authority, which ran the internment camps of the Japanese. The brother of Dwight Eisenhower, Milton Eisenhower, was named to head that organization. Posters were placed in the entire West Coast ordering the Japanese to evacuation points. I have to go to a break, and we're going to talk more about concentration camps created by the Democrats in the United States, because as we all know, Democrats are elitist and racist. We'll be back after this short commercial break. 7 on KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. We'll be back after this short break. Okay, we're back. 7 on KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. Streaming live on KURV.com, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, and my website, talkbackonline.com. We're going to talk about the phony baloney Democrat Party and the racism that has been emblematic of the Democratic Party since day one. You must remember that the Democrats were pro-slavery and put up a pro-slavery candidate in 1864. You must remember that Jim Crow laws were all done in southern states run by Democrats. You must remember the Ku Klux Klan was entirely Democrat. So the Democrats have always had a disdain for people of, for the non-elite. Of course, it doesn't prevent them from using the non-elite as their serfs and slaves. And that's, of course, what Democrats think they ought to be. I think what many people are unaware of is that when the Democrat Party incarcerated 120,000 Japanese for no other reason than they were Japanese, the United States also required, or at least asked, Canada to incarcerate their Japanese, and they did, amazingly enough, and also did the same thing in Latin America. And interestingly enough, the United States was willing to pay for that incarceration. And the United States did pay for the incarceration. So in many Latin American countries where there were Japanese populations, they were also incarcerated. Kind of amazing, isn't it, when you find out what the government is really capable of and who Franklin Roosevelt really was, racist and anti-Semite, as was his wife. The places where the Japanese were kept were concentration camps. They were guarded by tanks, towers with the machine guns, surrounded by barbed wire. They were confined to very small spaces. There was no amenities except the basics. Not even that. There was no heat. There was of course, no air conditioning. The Japanese were routinely beaten. Any protests, of course, were completely put down. The racism of the American government at that time cannot be overestimated. If you look at what we did to the Japanese in World War II is a stain on well, first of all, it was anti-constitutional. Completely and absolutely anti-constitutional. There was no due process whatsoever. Everything was done through executive order. American personalities such as Walter Lippmann expressed their disdain for, well, they didn't like Jews either, for that matter. We'll get onto that in another minute. Democrat Mississippi Congressman John Rankin said at the time, "I'm for catching every Japanese in America, Alaska, and Hawaii now and putting them in concentration camps and shipping them back to Asia as soon as possible. This is a race war as far as the Pacific side of the conflict is concerned. The white man's civilization has come into conflict with Japanese barbarism. One of them must be destroyed. Damn them, let's get rid of them now. Democrat, Mississippi Congressman John Rankin. There was talk about forced sterilization of Japanese. Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, who was also responsible for selling out the Chinese to Mao a few years later, said, referring to the Japanese, their racial characteristics are such that we cannot understand nor trust even the citizen Japanese, the inscrutable Oriental. Another man, considered another Democrat, his name, Assistant Secretary of War John J. McCloy, was all for incarcerating the Japanese. He's an interesting character because he was the one who refused to bomb the rail lines to the Auschwitz and other concentration camps in Germany, saying it was too much trouble. And so here you have someone who's a racist, an anti-Semite, and, of course, a Democrat and a high member of the Franklin Roosevelt regime. They all plead innocent, of course, talking about national security or whatever, but I find it interesting that the same person who helped incarcerate the Japanese because they were Japanese also refused to help the Jews who were in concentration camps in Europe, maybe because they were Jews. Do you think that's possible? Earl Warren, icon of the Democrats and liberal groups, so-called liberal groups, and we know they're not. As the Attorney General of California, Warren was an unbelievable racist. He belonged to a group called the Native Sons of the Golden West, an organization dedicated to keeping California as it has always been, and God himself intended it always shall be, the white man's paradise. This is Earl Warren. The Native Sons, of which Earl Warren was an honored member, worked to save California from the yellow Jap peaceful invaders and their white Jap co-conspirators. In 1942, Earl Warren testified before a special congressional committee on the Japanese question. He said that the Japanese had infiltrated themselves into every strategic spot in our coastal and valley counties. Earl Warren later, when the government began to release Japanese whose loyalty was above suspicion, then Governor Warren of California protested that every citizen so released had to be kept out of California as a potential saboteur. Earl Warren. Amazingly, distressingly, the many Japanese were still not allowed to go back to California up to 3 years after the war ended. The only person of consequence who was strongly opposed to the incarceration and placing in a concentration camp the Japanese was, take a guess, who do you think it was? What? Any takers out there? J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover, who's vociferously attacked by so many in the Barack Obama administration, was the only significant member of the United States government who was opposed to the incarceration of Japanese, stating that it was based primarily upon the public political pressure rather than factual data. So that's the United States government then and today. Now, if we go looking at the United States response to the slaughter of the Jews in Europe, what we have is Franklin Roosevelt, anti-Semite and racist, as was his wife, Eleanor. Didn't lift a finger to save any of the Jews, refused to give them asylum. Any Jews that arrived at the border were turned away. Refused to destroy the rail lines going into the concentration camps, which would have saved hundreds of thousands, would have saved probably the Hungarian Jewish population, since none of them were slaughtered in Hungary, or very few were actually killed in Hungary. The vast majority were transported west. If the transportation lines had been bombed, they could not have done that. Mr. McCloy said he couldn't bomb because it was too far out of the way. But there's actually films of American airplanes flying over the rail lines themselves. So that's the Democrat government of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, icon of the Democrats, icon of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, let us not forget. The same people, they're racists, elitists. They incarcerated the Japanese. They turned their back on the Jewish people. And interestingly enough, they're all for, same people were all for abortion of the undelivered infant. Okay, now we're going to go to Leo calling from Port Isabel. Thanks for calling, Leo. What's your comment, please?
Well, I just wanted to tell you that I had a friend who was captured in the Philippines on Corregidor, and he finally wound up in the prison camp in Tokyo, Japan. When he was captured, he weighed 185 pounds, and when they found him in the Tokyo prison, he weighed just barely 85 pounds. And the accounts that he told me about their treatment and by the Japanese and the food and everything, it was pretty hideous to our people that were captured by the Japanese and made the death march and all that sort of stuff. And I just thought I'd pass that on to you. He no longer lives, but I talked to him, and he would confide in me. And
right, I understand the horrors that were suffered by many people during the war, soldiers and civilians alike. But I'm not quite sure what is the point you're trying to make.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that our people that were captured by the Japanese were not treated humanely. And
once again, I mean, the Japanese in the United States were Americans. You're saying that because the Japanese mistreated our soldiers in the Philippines, that gave justification for our government to incarcerate American citizens because they were Japanese?
No. What I'm telling you is what happened to a friend of mine by the Japanese. That's all I'm telling you. Everybody will have to make their own decisions and about what took place as far as it goes, but I was just passing that on to you.
Well, I don't know what you mean by your own decisions. I mean, you're saying that each one of us should decide whether it was acceptable for the United States government to incarcerate 120,000 citizens into concentration camps for no other reason than they were Japanese. We didn't do the same with the Italians. We were at war with the Italians, and they were kind of nasty during the war. And we didn't do the same to the Germans. And in the United States, the Germans of German ancestry in the United States. And I understand that they were kind of nasty during the war as well. So I'm not quite sure what you mean that it's left up to each individual's opinion as to what was acceptable and what's not acceptable. You're saying if I think that someone should go into a concentration camp because of the color of their skin, then that's acceptable because I have the right to my own opinion?
What I'm saying is that none of it is right, and the treatment by us to the people of Japanese ancestry here is not, that doesn't make it right, but all I'm telling you is that the treatment of our people that were captured wasn't exactly a picnic either. That's what I'm trying to get over to you.
But the Japanese...
So both sides did some heinous things, but I would guarantee you the treatment of the Japanese in the United States was not as heinous as the treatment of our American soldiers that were captured over there. And that's all I'm trying to get over to you, and I thank you for listening to me.
Okay. Well, obviously, I don't agree with any of that. That's simply based upon the color of skin. The Americans were at war with the Japanese, and they treated each other not very well. I don't think, the United States did firebomb civilians in Tokyo, causing the loss of 100,000 lives or more. We did drop atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima with the loss of hundreds of thousands of more lives, civilians primarily, by the way. And so I'm not sure what you mean by heinous. The United States handed over China to the communists, and 60 million Chinese were then killed, which is more people than Hitler killed. So I think there's a real question as to which side acted more heinously. The United States military handed over hundreds of thousands of Germans to the Russians, and also repatriated hundreds of thousands of reluctant Russians back to the Stalinist gulag, where they were all slaughtered. And so I guess it depends whose ox is getting gored. The fact of the matter is, the United States has a lot to answer to for what it did, but the winning side is the writes the history books, so they say. Anyway, so my point is, the elitists that run governments, whether they're called Franklin Roosevelt, Barack Obama, Mao Zedong, Adolf Hitler, Fidel Castro, Stalin, or any of the rest, there is a mindset among all of them which is we ought to be wary of and fearful of, because they are the problem. The people suffer throughout the world because of the elites in the world, before and now. And people are suffering because of the elites such as George Bush and Barack Obama and any other elites. And and it's time to get away from this Japanese against American, American against German, German against Russian, and understand that our problems as peoples, come from one source, and that source is government. That government is the great evil of the world. And every one of these issues that we have talked about, and the incredible slaughter of human beings, has only been perpetrated by one entity. And that entity has nothing to do with color or race or religion, and everything to do with government. Only government can create concentration camps, commit war and genocide and mass murder. And it doesn't matter what color that government is. They're all the same. And that is the fact that governments try to conceal from the rest of us, that the real evil of the world is government. That government is the real evil of the world, and that we all need to be wary of government. Franklin Roosevelt was an elitist aristocrat. He hated Jews and he hated the Japanese. He was as disgusting an individual as ever existed in the world, responsible for the death of millions and millions of people and the enslavement of millions more. He's the icon of the Democrat Party. No surprise there. Now we have Steve calling from South Padre Island. 7 Caravi, thanks for calling. What's your comment?
Hi, Dr. Gelman. I'm a longtime listener. I just came in on part of your conversation with Leo, who's a friend of mine, and I was listening to it. And my comment has to do more with a little clarification. You said that during World War II, we interred just the Japanese, but we did. It was more than that. We interred Japanese, Germans, Russians, Italians. I come from up in Wisconsin, and Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, was one of the internment camps where they kept the various prisoners of war, and they had more than one nationality there. They had German, and these were first generation German or people who were suspected. Wisconsin was a big area for the Bund in the 1930s. They were supporters of the Nazis. And
right. No, I'm aware that there were others, but then again, for instance, Milwaukee. What's that?
They were in greater numbers than the Japanese, but all of it was wrong, of course.
Greater? You mean there were greater numbers of Germans and Italians incarcerated than?
Yes. Collectively, there were more non-Japanese that were interned than there were of the Japanese.
Okay, you may be right. I don't know. I hadn't heard about that. I also know of no executive orders written by Roosevelt which dealt with anything other than the Japanese directly, though there was an executive order which allowed certain areas off limits to anyone the military thought was unsafe. I do know that there were others, and I'm not sure if there was any reason given for that. There may have been, as there were some Japanese who were known to be maybe sympathetic to the Japan.
With the Japanese, it was primarily because they weren't white.
Yeah, primarily. Yeah. Primarily, but once again, none of that is acceptable unless there's due process. So the
right. And your point of the elitists, they create pretty much whatever they want to, and you're absolutely correct in that part. They can just
that's the point of it all, because ultimately racism and all of that is elitist philosophy. You just, one group just believes they're superior to another because of their race. But I'm not aware that this spread to other areas, because the United States did require Canada to incarcerate all their Japanese, 23,000, and also Latin America, their Japanese. So it's like I say, the only executive orders that I read which dealt with this issue, even though there was general orders about obviously security, there were no. The only group that was specifically mentioned was the Japanese. And another thing I might add is that even though the United States was chock full of communists, there was no executive order requesting the incarceration of communists who were actively promoting the overthrow of the United States government. So, I mean, I think it requires a general understanding of the philosophy of these people. Remember, communists are elitists, and so Franklin Roosevelt was a fascist and communist. He went between one and the other. But I understand what you're saying, and I have no problem. Look, I know that Leo has an issue because when you personally are suffered, or a friend personally suffers under the actions, then you sort of take a biased point of view. But maybe it's a justifiable bias. But the thing is that we need to try to rise above that, as difficult as it may be. I, for example, on both sides of my parents, my mother and father, both of their families were annihilated by the Germans. And obviously they don't have much good to say about the Germans, or the Poles for that matter, who turned in their families. But the fact of the matter is that the same German that was a Nazi in 1945 became an ally of the United States in 1946. And to think that a German born in Germany is somehow intrinsically different than a German someone of German ancestry born in the United States, that there's somehow an intrinsic difference between the two, I think is simply not the case, and that we need to try to rise above that, even though obviously those who are personally affected have the justifiable reason not to be able to do that. And I can't address that, not having been exposed to such circumstances myself, fortunately. But I'm just saying that from the objective point of view, we need to understand that the Nazis it was the Nazi government, and it was the American government, and not the people that did all of those really bad, nasty, very, very, very horrific acts. Anything else?
Well put. Well, listen, I just want to tell you, I always like listening to your show, well researched, and I like your voices of opinion, and I'll send you a link or something.
Do that.
If you want, I'll stay on, and so I can talk with your call man.
She'll take your information.
I'll know who it's coming from, so that you don't think it's spam.
Okay. No, I believe you. I've heard of it before. I actually know people who've had relatives that were put into cancer because they were German. I understand that. In fact, there's a movie, gosh darn it, what was the name of the movie? Made in Canada, of a bunch of German expatriates that were living in Canada. It was when they had this little story about Nazis coming across in a submarine and trying to infiltrate into Canada and kind of crash landed or something over there. I don't remember exactly. It was a great movie. And in it, there's reference to some of the Germans that had been taken in by the Canadian government and ended up being incarcerated because unjustifiably. So there even was at least that movie where there's a reference to Germans being incarcerated during the war because of concerns about their political allegiances. So I definitely know that was happening. What I didn't know, and I was surprised to hear from you, Steve, was that you're saying that the actual total numbers of incarcerated non-Japanese exceeded the number of Japanese, and that I would like to see somewhere. So, okay, if you could send it to me.
I'll send you some links, and
okay.
Thanks again for your show. Really appreciate hearing it.
Okay, well, thanks for listening. I appreciate that. Thanks for calling. And so it's easy to be allowed oneself to be indoctrinated. My daughter was in Argentina a couple of years back. Went to a soccer game in the barbarians that populate Argentina, and the stands were full of people, and the two teams that were playing were both teams from Argentina. Of course, one side had its fans, the other had the other side's fans, and so lethal was the feelings of these particular fans, even though they're all from Argentina, even though the teams are from Argentina, that the police had to empty out one side of the stadium before the other side so that these people wouldn't kill each other in the parking lot. Isn't that insane? This is the kind of emotions that people can allow themselves to fall into. Sometimes greater than a natural emotion. How is it that we have these visceral feelings of hate towards others that we've never met, simply because we've been taught and told and indoctrinated to do so by our own government? Of course, the only reason to have a government really is to protect us from other governments. They all kind of work together. That's why they all love each other and have these little meetings around the world to make sure that they're still in control. But that is why they all protect each other. That is why governments have to protect each other. That is why we're bailing out Greece and we're bailing out Cyprus and other countries, and why we bailed out the Soviet Union was because governments protect each other. Ultimately, governments protect each other when it comes right down to it. Unless, of course, it looks like the government is going to overthrow, and governments seems to me like they're going to win, so we want to go with them. But anyway, essentially, governments protect governments, and people are slaves. So the governments are all bad, and they're all the same. It doesn't matter what color of skin they have, and that's all there is to it. So, and all this contrivance of one government against another is simply the elite of one group against the elite. It's just elite. It's just elitism. It's nothing other than rampant elitism. Okay. So it all comes down to that basic fact. So let's see what are we talking about here? I just Dr. Ben Carson apparently is persona non grata at Johns Hopkins University because he said the unbelievable backward statement that what did he say? He's opposed to gay marriage because it's he said, my thoughts are that marriage is between a man and a woman. It's a well-established fundamental pillar of society, and no group, be they gays, be they NAMBLA, be they people who believe in bestiality, doesn't matter what they are, they don't get to change the definition. Can you imagine him saying that? I apologize to all of those practicing bestiality in the United States today. I wish there's an increasing number. Also, to all those doing pedophilia, including you school teachers that are sexually abusing your students, of which there's only a couple 100,000 of those around instances. We must apologize to you for if we hurt your sensibilities. So Dr. Ben Carson, who's a doctor and therefore a scientist and a physician, says the unpardonable statement that marriage between one man and one woman. Bill O'Reilly, as we started this conversation, Bill O'Reilly's a fraud, an arrogant fraud, and I've been telling you people for a long time that's what he is. Fox News is phony. I don't even know if they use Fox News in this program anymore. Anyway, Fox News is a phony outfit like the Republican Party. I'm just going off here on a little bit of tangents here and there. And so I like our communications. They don't necessarily support my views, but then they really willingly foist Fox News upon the unsuspecting listener. So Fox News, member of the disloyal Republican Party. Anyway, so Bill O'Reilly, icon star of Fox station, really shouldn't they? You need to know who they are. And Bill O'Reilly's a fraud. He's arrogant. I love the way he interviewed. His interview process was, "What am I thinking now? No, that's not it." And that's and he comes up culture warrior. Bill O'Reilly comes up with the culture. It's ironic. Here's an individual who says that only Bible thumpers are opposed to same-sex marriage. Well, I can assure you, I'm not a Bible thumper, and I don't think you're supposed to thump your Bible. Actually, it's supposed to be a sacred work. But the fact of the matter is that's not the case at all. Biology also refutes same-sex marriage, and so anyway, we have to go to break. 7 KRV, talk by Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Only our microphone, streaming live, KURV.com. My website, talkbackonline.com. And you can catch all these pearls of wisdom. You're never going to get anywhere else, certainly not from Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity for that matter, or anywhere on Fox News. Be back after this break. What do you mean we're back? We're back when I say we're back. So there. Okay, I just been informed that you don't have to bother going to KURV.com to catch streaming live. You can go over to my website, which, by the way, was set up by Kenny LaFave, who's the better half of the drive-by that they have in 4 to 6 p.m. So you can go to talkbackonline.com, and I guess you can stream live directly from there and go to all the old programs. I'm going to have to figure out a better way so people know what I'm talking about, even though I imagine they have an idea what I'm talking about. Okay, we have Jack calling from Edinburgh, 7 KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Why? Hey, what do you got to say, Jack?
Well, I'd like to underline something you've already said, and that is that the people in government and governments, in general, who have done these heinous acts over the centuries, over the years, are still with us. They're right there. They're right there in government, and they use things like executive orders and presidential directives to sidestep the Constitution. They use things like the Emergency War Powers Act of 1917, which was amended in, I think it was 1933. It was amended to include the American people as enemy of the state. All kinds of bizarre things that have given the U.S. federal government power above and beyond the Constitution.
Well, there's nothing in the Constitution. The word executive order does not exist in the Constitution. Executive power exists in the Constitution, and it is only a power that can be used to execute legislation passed by the Congress. So there's no such thing as executive order. That's just nothing but dictatorial rule by a fascist government. And so, as I was talking earlier, the incarceration of the Japanese was through executive order. There is no such thing as executive order in the Constitution. Look, this is a fascist dictatorship. That's all there is to it. The people who create concentration camps, their heirs are in government today, whether it's Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, or anyone else. They are Barack Obama or George Bush. They are the heirs of those that have enslaved and murdered for hundreds and hundreds of years. What else?
I agree. Well, I agree with everything you've said today. And as I said, I just want to underline that these people are still with us. They're in the government right now. And the American people have better beware because we are living in very interesting times. Anyway, thank you for all that you do.
Oh, thanks for calling. So I can't get over this thing with Dr. Ben Carson, and apparently there's a petition at Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins is a phony baloney institution, by the way. Phony baloney. A bunch of elitists, second-raters, no consequence. I don't know why he'd bother to speak in front of them anyway. But it's really a sad. I'm a physician, and physicians are supposed to be embedded in reality. And it's amazing to me that are really no better than anyone else. Physicians support abortion of the undelivered infant. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology supported late-term abortion, which is murder, outright murder of a human being. Now we have Johns Hopkins, vastly overrated school, medical school, and this is just further evidence of that. That is, had a petition signed. I don't know if any professors signed it, which wants to disinvite Dr. Ben Carson because he made a completely correct biological statement that is grounded in reality, that every physician ought to understand is true. What is it that's going on in our medical schools today? What is it that's going on in our society today? How much have we been corrupted? It's just amazing to me. The fact of the matter is that marriage is between a man and a woman because the object of marriage is to create a family and that is sustaining and will move on and is perpetuating throughout the society. That's what it is for. Homosexual marriage, by its very nature, cannot self-perpetuate. So I don't understand. But when you can make people believe the world is flat, I guess you can make them believe anything. And if you can make people believe that Barack Obama is intelligent, I guess you can make him believe anything. It's just amazing to me what kind of low level of individuals we have in the system of education, in the media, in the government. It's just amazing to me. I kind of refer to this whole situation, I like to refer to it as a Jew and a German in a Nazi court. Because that's the situation those of us who know reality and who really believe in justice, that situation we find ourselves in. A Jew in a Nazi court. It really doesn't matter what you're going to do. The evil people are in charge. The Barack Obamas, the George Bushes, the Bill Clintons, the Hillary Clintons, the Chuck Schumers and Nancy Pelosi's. They're the ones who, gangsters, who've taken over the reins of government. And they have indoctrinated and propagandized even medical institutions. I find it unbelievable that how you have Bill O'Reilly, who's a coward. He is no different than the intelligentsia in Germany that caved in to Adolf Hitler because that was the way the political winds were blowing. And afterwards, they didn't know what happened, and they said, they were whatever. But Bill O'Reilly, when Bill O'Reilly said that the only ones supporting same-sex marriage are Bible thumpers, I had a flashback to all those German judges, jurists, doctors in Germany who fell in line with the perverted Nazi doctrine. And that is all they did. You know, people talk about doctors who perform abortions on the undelivered infant are just no different than Nazi doctors. There's nothing apparently, unfortunately, particularly moral about a physician anymore. We should have learned that by what the Nazi doctors did in Germany and the Russian doctors did and do in Russia. So what's the surprise that doctors commit murder on the most innocent of human lives in the United States? When you can say, I guess there shouldn't be a surprise to me that if you can get physicians that say late-term abortion is an acceptable form of birth control and that the killing of the undelivered infant is perfectly acceptable, then why should we be surprised that physicians in Johns Hopkins and elsewhere think that same-sex marriage is as legitimate as a heterosexual marriage? Do they not understand biology? Do they not understand the way things work? Do they not understand what the definition of perversion is? But look at how indoctrinated they've become, brainwashed. The very same people who say the same process that created these drones at Johns Hopkins, and they are nothing but drones of government. That process is the exact same process that occurred in Nazi Germany. And as an example of indoctrination through propaganda, there is no greater example than what occurred in Nazi Germany. Their population became converted into a perversion through propaganda and indoctrination, in which they came to believe that there were actually one race was superior to another. They actually believed that in their hearts and souls, and they had no compunction whatsoever to incarcerate and murder for those who were not Aryans because they considered them less than human. The Nazi did not consider himself evil. They considered themselves doing good and doing healthy things. In fact, the speech by Gerhard Wagner in 1935 defended the Nuremberg laws, which created the separation of peoples based on race. The term health appears over 20 times in that document. The same way that the abortionists today use women's health as one of their catchphrases in their discourse. And so you have physicians who, to show you the power of indoctrination, 1984, read the book 1984, the power over the mind that authority can have over the mind. How it allows one to actually torture and kill another person and go to sleep with a good conscience thinking they have done the proper thing because the government has told them that's the proper thing. It's amazing to me, especially in the medical field, when you're taught the science, but somehow disengage yourself from the science and then fall into the political trap of political correctness, where knowledge is sacrificed on an altar of political correctness. It's this ability that I guess people have to disconnect parts of their lives from other parts. How can you be taught on the process of procreation, pregnancy, all that goes into the development of a human being, the embryology and biology, physiology, and all of that? How can you be taught that and understand the way things function in the real world? Because to function in the real world is what physicians are all about. You have to deal with the real way of dealing with disease, not just witchcraft, the reality of it. And yet, in your personal life, actually go along with this garbage, this tripe, this political nonsense that's spewed out by the government for its own agenda, and to be brainwashed to such an extent as to say that when someone tells you the truth, not only do you not recognize the truth, you actually fight against it. It's a sad day. So I guess Dr. Ben Carson realizes what it is like to be a Jew in a Nazi court, because he's that Jew in a Nazi court today, as many of the rest of us are who dare say anything against this lie that is same-sex marriage, and that it is somehow equal to heterosexual marriage. That is just simply a lie. It denies the reason for marriage. It denies the basis of the family. It denies it, and yet we allow them to get away with it. And then we cower behind the fear of being on the outside, being not popular, being cast as bad people, not progressive. Well, the philosophy of racial superiority was not inherent in Germany alone. It existed in Franklin Roosevelt and Hillary Clinton just as well. These kinds of philosophies, this view that this arbitrarily contrived decisions based upon what appears to be in the mode at the time. So I think it's up to each one of us independently to stand up for what's right. I found very interesting and distressing. I went to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem a couple years back. For those of you who have gone to the Holocaust museums in the United States, and I've been to the ones in Houston and Washington, those places are Disney World compared to the one in Israel, which is just heart-wrenching. I think the thing that gets me is that none of it can be undone. I think that's the absolute, the thing that gets you the most. None of it can be undone. Justice was never served, and that it continues to this day. The same Hitler of then is the Bill Clinton of today, who allowed 1 million Tutsis in Rwanda to be slaughtered without a response. Where was the justice? Why doesn't someone ask Madeleine Albright that at our indoctrinated universities? Why don't you ask Madeleine Albright what she thought about the United States' response to the slaughter of Tutsis in Rwanda, and what the United States did or did not do about that. So when as I was saying, in the Holocaust Museum, they have a room of heroes, I think is what they call it. And those individuals who were not Jews, who saved the lives of thousands of Jews in Europe at great personal risk. And what I find also interesting and distressing is that only one government in the entire world saved its Jewish population. That was the government of Bulgaria. Of the 50,000 Jews in Bulgaria, not a single one lost his or her life in the Holocaust. The French deported their Jews. In Netherlands, they did the same thing. The United States would have if given the opportunity. And no country provided sanctuary for the Jews. No country. The Dominican Republic, I understand, accepted some if they were paid to do so. At least that. But the United States refused to do so under any circumstances and allowed millions to be killed. The British purposefully blocked off the only exit point for the Jews of Europe by blocking immigration into the British-controlled mandate of Palestine. If it hadn't been for the British, the Holocaust would not have occurred. Very complicit world in slaughter, and there's nothing different today. So what I noticed at the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem was that all these Jews that were saved by individuals, not by governments. In fact, any government official such as the one in Sweden who was giving passports, Swedish passports to Jews. Once he was discovered, he was fired. He did manage to save 1,500 or so Jewish people. But the governments of that world went out of their way to deny asylum to the Jews and help and were complicit in the slaughter of the Jews and others as well. After all, it was the French police who tortured French partisans. Let us not forget that. So the governments, they're all the same. They're all blood brothers under the skin. They're all barbaric and evil and petty, arrogant and murderous. They are the cause of all of our problems. The courage of those individuals who saved the Jews is, I think, I cannot imagine it. How does one willingly risk their life and the lives of their families to save someone else, maybe even strangers? That's a rare characteristic. Certainly not characteristic of any politicians that I know. And I'm not saying I could do it if I had to risk my family in order to save someone that was being persecuted by the government. I don't know if I would have the courage to do that. Until that situation occurs, I don't think any of us will know. It's a great thing that they have done in Israel, that they have recorded the names of all those they could find who did risk their lives, not just their business, not just their economic well-being, but their very lives and the lives of their families by saving thousands of Jewish people. Something that Franklin Roosevelt refused to do, that Eleanor Roosevelt refused to do. Just as Bill and Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright refused to save the Tutsis of Rwanda. Refused to do so. Absolutely refused to do so. That is who Bill Clinton really is. That is who Franklin Roosevelt really was. That's who these people really are. And we should not forget that. They are gangsters. They are mobsters. They are detestable people who are in it for themselves and who, underneath it all, are essentially cowards. Whether it's Earl Warren, who wants to become governor and therefore puts Japanese into concentration camps, or Franklin Roosevelt, who turns away Jewish people on leaky ships on U.S. shores, or refuses to bomb the rail lines leading from Hungary to Auschwitz because it would have saved Jews, and he was an anti-Semite, an aristocratic anti-Semite. All of those Hollywood stars who have parties for Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, who's now gone. All of those people who honor Stalin and Mao, and all the other dictators and murderers and butchers of the world. It's time for you to grow up a little bit and learn what the reality is. There's a caller? I don't know. Anyway, very depressing and distressing. I feel sorry for Dr. Ben Carson for what he's going through. It must be somewhat. Of course, I know he's above that, but I am ashamed to have the people at Johns Hopkins be in the same profession than I am in. It is a shame. It is a humiliation. It is disgusting that there's actually people like that going to go out there and become physicians. Okay, last call. We have go on. Hung up. All right, too bad. So I guess Ben Carson will be the next one to be crucified, and I guess that's something in this Easter day to be talking about crucifixion of those who are willing to stand up for right. Happy Easter to all, by the way, but it's a remembrance of those who sacrifice themselves to do what is just, to do what is right against all the powers of the world, that right is right, that justice is justice, and though it may be subverted and undermined by government, that there is a right and there is a wrong, and for all those who are willing to sacrifice themselves in order to put what's right above their own personal safety and well-being, those people need to be honored as we honor Jesus Christ these days for the sacrifices that he made, and for all those who made sacrifices in the name of justice. Back next week, 7 to KRV, Talkback Dr. Lawrence Gelman, streaming live on KURV.com, my website, online.com, on talkbackonline.com, talkbackonline.com. That's it? All right. I need to write that down. Back next week. Thanks for listening.